Hello everyone, I'm Rose, and today we're diving into a powerful story about leadership, accountability, and the fight for real change in the airline industry. What happens when the owner of an airline goes undercover and witnesses discrimination firsthand? Stay with me. This is a lesson in justice you won't forget. Undercover leadership and firsthand. Truth. Tyrell Bennett adjusted the straps of his worn backpack, his heart pounding as he walked through the bustling airport terminal. The polished floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the hurried movements of travelers lost in their own worlds. He had walked these halls countless times, but never like this. Today, he wasn't the billionaire CEO of Horizon Airlines. Today, he was just another passenger, anonymous, unseen, unnoticed. That's exactly how he wanted it. For years, he had built Horizon Airlines into one of the most prestigious carriers in the industry. He had seen glowing reports from executives, polished surveys boasting high customer satisfaction, and corporate presentations filled with carefully curated data. But numbers could lie. Policies could be ignored. He needed to see for himself if the airline he had built truly upheld the values he believed in. So, he bought a standard economy ticket, dressed in casual clothes, and set out to experience his own airline, not from the comfort of first class, but from the cramped, narrow rows at the back of the plane where no one would recognize him. As he approached the gate, he watched the staff closely. Some were courteous, moving with a sense of duty and purpose. Others were indifferent, treating passengers like an inconvenience. But it wasn't until he boarded the plane that the real test began. The moment he stepped onto the aircraft, he felt the difference. The first-class passengers were greeted warmly, their needs met with eager smiles and accommodating gestures. But as he shuffled toward the back, the warmth faded. The flight attendants barely glanced at him. There was no greeting, no eye contact, just a cold mechanical efficiency that made it clear where he stood in the invisible hierarchy of air travel. He took his seat and observed. That's when he saw her, Lily Anderson. Her posture was rigid, her expression impassive as she moved through the aisle. She wasn't just indifferent. There was something sharper beneath it, something dismissive. She bypassed certain passengers with barely concealed irritation, her tone clipped when addressing them. A woman wearing a hijab hesitated before requesting assistance, only to be met with an impatient sigh. A black couple asked about their pre-ordered meal, only for Lily to brush them off as if they were a nuisance. Tyrell's jaw clenched. He had come here to observe, but what he was witnessing was worse than he imagined. His airline, his creation, was harboring something deeply, fundamentally wrong. And he would not let it stand. Chapter 2. Exposure of Discrimination and Bias. Tyrell Bennett watched in silence as Lily Anderson made her way down the aisle. Her presence a stark contrast to the bright smiling flight attendant assisting passengers with ease. While others worked with warmth and professionalism, Lily moved like a machine, efficient yet detached, treating passengers not as people, but as obligations to be checked off her list. Tyrell had seen this kind of behavior before in boardrooms, in high-class restaurants, in the hushed conversations of executives who believed they were untouchable. But here, in the narrow aisles of his own aircraft, it felt even more insidious. This wasn't just inattentiveness or a bad day. This was a pattern, deliberate and unmistakable. He first noticed it when an elderly black woman struggled to place her bag in the overhead compartment. She glanced around for help, her frail arms trembling under the weight. A younger passenger finally stood to assist her, but Lily Anderson, standing mere feet away, didn't even flinch. Not a word, not a gesture, as if the woman were invisible. A few rows ahead, a mother with a restless toddler tried to soothe her child, shifting in her seat uncomfortably. When the child accidentally kicked the seat in front, Lily turned abruptly, her voice sharp. "You need to keep your child under control," she snapped, loud enough for heads to turn. The mother's cheeks flushed as she stammered an apology, but Lily had already moved on. Then came the moment that made Tyrell's stomach churn. A passenger, a woman wearing a hijab, reached for a personal snack from her bag. Lily's eyes narrowed as she stopped beside her. "I hope you're not making a mess," she said flatly, her tone laced with something unmistakable. The woman stiffened, her fingers pausing over the unopened package. "I won't," she replied quietly, lowering her gaze. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick with unspoken power. Tyrell felt something inside him coil tight. It was subtle, the kind of discrimination that left no tangible evidence but was felt, deep and cutting, by the people who endured it. This wasn't just one bad flight attendant. This was a culture that had gone unchecked. His name was on this airline, his reputation woven into every policy, every employee's uniform. And now, he was watching that reputation crumble in real time. He had all the proof he needed. Lily Anderson wasn't just an inattentive worker. She was a liability. And now, she was his problem to solve. Chapter 3: Accountability and Consequences. Tyrell Bennett unbuckled his seatbelt, his pulse steady but his mind storming. Lily Anderson had crossed a line. What he had witnessed wasn't just inefficiency, it was outright discrimination, laced with the kind of casual cruelty that came from knowing there were no consequences. But today, there would be. He remained silent as the plane taxied to the gate, watching her closely. She stood at the front of the aircraft, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. The way she carried herself, the dismissiveness in her stance, it was clear she felt untouchable. That was about to change. Passengers shuffled forward, gathering their belongings. Tyrell remained seated, waiting. One by one, they exited the aircraft, some murmuring quiet frustrations, others casting uncertain glances at the woman in the hijab, the elderly passenger, the mother with the child, all of them carrying the weight of Lily's silent judgment, and she didn't even seem to notice. Finally, he stood, adjusting the straps of his bag as he made his way toward the exit. Lily barely spared him a glance as he passed, offering a hollow, impersonal, "Thank you for flying with us." But Tyrell didn't keep walking. He turned, leveling his gaze at her. "Actually," he said evenly, his voice carrying the authority he had withheld all flight, "I need a word with you." She blinked, momentarily caught off guard, but quickly recovered. "Sir, if you have a concern, you can speak with customer service." Tyrell let the silence stretch between them before he spoke again, his voice calm, deliberate. "I'm not a customer." Confusion flickered across her face. The other flight attendants nearby glanced at each other, sensing a shift in the air. Then, the purser, the lead flight attendant, approached, his eyes widening slightly as recognition dawned. "Mr. Bennett," he breathed. Lily's face paled. Tyrell nodded. "That's right." He turned his gaze back to her. "And I just watched you represent my airline in a way I find completely unacceptable." She opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to feign ignorance, but Tyrell held up a hand. "You're done. Effective immediately, you are being removed from flight duties, pending a full investigation." The weight of his words crashed into her, and for the first time all flight, Lily Anderson was speechless. Chapter 4: Systemic Reform Over Individual Punishment. Tyrell Bennett sat in the sterile silence of Horizon Airlines corporate headquarters, his hands clasped as he faced a room filled with his top executives. The weight of what he had seen on that flight still sat heavy in his chest. The silent biases, the casual cruelty, the way Lily Anderson had wielded her authority not to serve, but to diminish. But the truth was, firing her wasn't enough. Lily wasn't the disease. She was just a symptom. The real sickness had been growing, unchecked, beneath layers of polished policies and feel-good corporate slogans. "We have a serious problem," Tyrell said, his voice cutting through the room. The executives, many of whom had heard whispers of what happened, shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't about one employee. This is about how someone like her felt safe behaving that way under our banner." His eyes swept across the room, lingering on those who had sat through diversity meetings, who had nodded at ethics reports, who had assumed the policies in place were enough to prevent exactly what he had witnessed. Let me be clear. It wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I saw it with my own eyes. And if it happened once, I guarantee you, it's happened before. Silence. Tyrell leaned forward. "This is what we're going to do. First, we're implementing immediate retraining for all frontline staff, flight attendants, gate agents, customer service reps. Not a box-checking exercise, real immersive training. I want them to understand that their authority is not a weapon. Second, we're overhauling our feedback and accountability systems. No more complaints disappearing into corporate purgatory. If a passenger reports mistreatment, I want that report in my hands. If an employee sees something and speaks up, I want them protected, not punished. Third, I want random undercover evaluations. Not just me going incognito, but a real system in place to ensure that the culture we preach is the culture we practice." A murmur spread through the table, some nodding, some fidgeting. It was bold. It was drastic. It was necessary. Tyrell straightened, his expression unyielding. "We built Horizon Airlines to be different, but we can't just say it. We have to prove it. Every day, every flight, every passenger." His voice dropped to a quiet command. "Fix it." And in that moment, there was no doubt. It wasn't just an order. It was a promise. Chapter 5. Personal Growth and Redemption. Lily Anderson sat stiffly in the front row of the Horizon Airlines retraining program, her hands clasped together, her nails digging into her palms. She wasn't supposed to be here. A few weeks ago, she had been the one enforcing the rules, moving through the aisles with detached authority. Now, she was the one being watched, evaluated, judged. The irony burned in her chest. She had spent years climbing the ranks, learning the policies, perfecting the sharp efficiency that had once been praised. But one mistake, one humiliating exposure, had sent her crashing down. And the worst part? She deserved it. The instructor at the front of the room clicked through a slide. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a decision made in a split second. Who we help, how we speak, who we dismiss. Lily swallowed hard. She knew exactly what that meant. She had done it. She had looked at passengers and made quiet, cruel judgments, not because she hated them, but because she had been trained to believe she was right. She had believed she was protecting standards, maintaining control, but all she had done was reinforce the very system that had once shut her out. The next few weeks were brutal. She wasn't just memorizing policies again. She was confronting herself. Every scenario they discussed, every real-life example of prejudice, she saw herself in it. The woman who dismissed a struggling passenger, the employee who chose silence when she should have spoken up, the flight attendant who let bias dictate her actions. She had been all of them. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, She sat alone in the training center, staring at her reflection in the glass window. Could she fix this? Or was she beyond saving? The answer came from the last person she expected. "Still here?" a voice asked. She turned to see Tyrell Bennett. He watched her carefully, unreadable as always. She exhaled. "I don't know if I deserve to be." Tyrell studied her for a long moment. Then he simply said, "Then prove that you do." And for the first time since her world fell apart, Lily Anderson felt something unfamiliar: hope. Chapter 6: Cultural Transformation and Lasting Change. Tyrell Bennett stepped onto the next Horizon Airlines flight, but this time he wasn't undercover. He wasn't blending in, he was watching, not for one person, not for a single moment of failure, but for proof. Proof that the storm he had created had led to something better. Months had passed since that disastrous flight, since he had seen firsthand the cracks in the company he built. He had torn through the complacency, ripped out the rot at its roots, and demanded a transformation. But now, as he walked down the aisle of one of his own planes, he needed to see if any of it had mattered. The first thing he noticed was the energy. It wasn't just the forced politeness of customer service, it was real. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with genuine attentiveness, helping passengers without hesitation. A mother juggling a toddler and her luggage was met with instant assistance. A passenger in a wheelchair was greeted warmly, their needs anticipated rather than ignored. The old tension, the invisible hierarchy of worth, was gone. Then he saw her. Lily Anderson. She stood near the front of the plane, straight-backed, composed, but different. There was no cold detachment, no quiet superiority. Instead, there was purpose. He watched as she noticed a nervous young passenger struggling with the overhead bin. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. "Let me help you with that," she said, her tone smooth, natural. No edge, no impatience. The young man nodded, relief in his eyes, and she secured his bag before offering a small smile. "You're all set. Let us know if you need anything." It was seamless, thoughtful, human. Tyrell let out a slow breath. As passengers settled in, Lily turned, and their eyes met. For a moment, the weight of everything that had passed between them hung in the air. The mistakes, the reckoning, the second chance she had fought to deserve. She gave him a nod, not of submission, but of understanding. And Tyrell nodded back. The airline had changed. She had changed. And for the first time in a long time, Tyrell Bennett knew that Horizon Airlines wasn't just his company anymore. It was finally the airline it was meant to be. This story teaches us that true leadership isn't about sitting in an office. It's about staying connected to the reality of those you serve. Tyrell Bennett could have ignored the complaints, but instead, he sought the truth firsthand and took action. His experience shows that systemic change starts with accountability, not just policies on paper. When biases go unchecked, they can shape a toxic culture. But when leaders demand better, transformation happens. The lesson? Never assume your business, workplace, or community is immune to hidden injustices. Stay engaged, listen, and most importantly, be willing to act. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful lessons on leadership, justice, and real-world transformations, make sure to follow me for more. Until next time, stay aware, stay inspired, and always stand up for what's right. See you in the next one.